Hi students, Professor Franklin here to talk about Gothic art, a period of art that takes place in the late High Middle Ages. Throughout our lecture today, there will be a few external video sources I'll need you to watch, so I'll let you know when to pause, and you can look for those in the notes section just below our video. We have a lot of popular imagery to do with Gothic art, the world of Gotham, gargoyles, the Gothic revival style that surrounds us in our great cities such as St. Patrick's in New York City. This style itself was a type of art that flourished in the late Middle Ages and was characterized by a lot of innovations in building styles and technology, including things like large expanses of stained glass, clustered columns, which allowed larger open spaces to push their weight out onto piers. Those piers were supported on the outside by flying buttresses, sharply pointed spires and arches, intricate high relief sculpture, and the pointed arch itself. I have some terminology here that I'd like for you to have in your notebook if you're part of my online classes. Ribbed vault, an intersection of two pointed barrel vaults, a nave, which is the center of a church meant to accommodate the most of the congregation, apse, a large semicircular recess with a domed roof, typically at the eastern end of a church and typically containing an altar, flying buttresses. These are exterior support mechanisms for the upper piers of a Gothic cathedral. The pointed arch, which is a type of arch or architectural doorway that has a pointed crown to it. And stained glass windows, which are colored glass windows used to form pictorial designs, typically applied in church windows. The origin of Gothic art and architecture is a little fuzzy, but we are certain that it was inspired largely by a Christian's writings named Abbot Suger, and he believed that a church should have three very important characteristics. It should appear to reach towards heaven, it should have harmonious proportions, and should be filled with light. In order to accomplish this, they employed those mechanisms we looked at in the last slide, things like rib vaulting, flying buttresses, and stained glass windows. Here the Gothic style was born largely in an area called Ile-de-France, which hadn't really developed its own Romanesque style. So when these components of architecture entered the scene, they weren't competing with an already established style locally, and they took off. We are looking down the nave, or the central aisle of St. Denis, and you can see at the end the rounded apse with the semicircular dome on top. This looks very different from our Middle Age cathedrals we had seen up until this. Generally, we would look down this central aisle, and we would see at the end an image of Christ, a large image, maybe a Pantocrator Christ, something that was imposing and meant to be didactic or overwhelming in some way, and of moral components or moral teaching. Here, instead, we see stained glass, a light-filled room. You can see in the ceiling intersections of two different mechanisms. So if you see those cross-shaped stripes in the ceilings, those are our barrel vaults meeting, our pointed barrel vaults meeting, giving us rib vaulting. You can see the pointed archways, transitions into the other spaces, the stained glass windows, the large, expansive, open, and airy space here. This is in sharp contrast to the Romanesque cathedrals we looked at last week. Here's the exterior. So this Gothic style that appears in Ile-de-France, largely because of a lack of local style. Here that we have three portal entrances rather than the one portal entrance we had in the Romanesque. These portals made to inspire some sort of awe, potentially again some sort of didactic lesson. Here we have three, a reference to the Holy Trinity. You can see the rest of the building is split up into tripartite breaks as well, so areas of three windows stacked on top of each other, three different bays wide, left to right, three different portal entrances. In the Romanesque lecture, we talked about the advent of pilgrimages, and that is something that is really key and critical to the development of these types of cathedrals. And I'll talk a little bit about that more in a few slides, but This is an important component of these cathedrals that allowed for pilgrimages to happen comfortably. A pilgrim might arrive, and inside the church there might be something happening. So let's say there is a mass being held. A pilgrim was still able to enter and experience the church by walking around in what they call the ambulatory. So these are peering into some of the ambulatory chapels of St. Denis. You can think of this as almost an external track to the church that would not disturb what was happening in the central nave, but still allowed complete and full access to experience the glories or potentially even the relics that the church had to show. Here's a peek into St. Foy. This was a Romanesque cathedral. And you can see, even though there's quite a bit of light coming in from the clerestory windows, it's very dense, close. Yes, they are reaching some soaring proportions with the height of the central nave here, but it's very heavy. All the ornamentation is heavy. They are employing stone, they are using what technology they have, but there isn't a lightness and airiness to it like that interior of St. Denis we just saw a few slides ago. There are dozens of incredible pilgrimage cathedrals from the Gothic period, but I would like to focus today on one, a singular, incredibly breathtaking cathedral called Chartres Cathedral in Chartres, France. Please take a moment, pause this video, and go and watch this introduction to some of the conservation efforts that had to take place in order to reveal to us the glories of Chartres that we're able to see today. Building these cathedrals was the largest economic enterprise of the era. Different regions would compete in order to raise their own incredible Gothic cathedral, and priests would often regionally give up their salaries for a series of years, in the case of Chartres, for 3 years, in order to help fund the church. Masons, carpenters, stone cutters, pilgrims, all of them came to see the raising of this cathedral. This stimulated the economy. There was a great sense of civic pride. Chartres itself was a total domination of the landscape surrounding it and supported the village of 10,000 people in the 13th century. Their livelihood surrounded by this church, the construction of it, and once it was fully constructed, the pilgrimages that were coming also supported and stimulated the local economy. Here you can see a carpenter's guild window. You can think of the guilds as a type of union. So a wealthy family or a group of certain types of skilled laborers, for instance, the carpenters, would donate a panel of the stained glass in order to have a legacy in the church. In just a few weeks, we'll be talking about the Renaissance, and I just want to mention now, we'll be peering into the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci. And backing up to our Gothic period of time, we have some notebooks from a master builder. This was the person that supervised the construction of a cathedral. This person would have been well-traveled, literate, and probably would have apprenticed with a master from the age of 13. They were well paid. They were familiar with the world of the clergy, the church, and also the world of noble. So they were able to navigate and support the entirety of the process of building a cathedral. One of their main functions was understanding deeply the iconography and the significance of the iconography for the artistic program that would be employed in the entirety of the church. They also kept these master forms or master templates, and that was really the core component of their job. You can think of them almost as an engineer more than a builder, and these templates, the different shapes of the rocks that would be needed to comprise or create this entire cathedral, were at the hands of this master builder. I had mentioned the idea of flying buttresses in our first slide, and I just want to show that to you here. So I'm going to just use my little marker. This is the interior of the cathedral. You can see these rib vaultings pushing out their weight onto these piers, and that on itself, like a house of cards, would just flop open if it didn't have these external supports. So this here, these are the flying buttresses. You can think of them as an external skeleton that helps to push the weight of the building back into its center. These were used in order to get that high, soaring open spaces, and also to allow the room that stained glass windows needed to take in these artistic applications. Here we look at the west facade of Chartres Cathedral. This building site was slightly elevated from the land surrounding it, which continues to help raise your eye towards the sky. Remember Abbot Suger's ideas about building towards the heavens. The right tower here dates from approximately the 1160s, was finished in 1194. You can see that it's a little more squattish, even though the spires are reaching just as high, right and left tower. There's something more dense, less open about it. When we look towards the left, that was begin in 1507, squarely in the Gothic period of time. You can see there's open lacework, these intricate spires. There's an airiness to it, a quality to it that really raises your eye higher, even though they're similar in height. When we look here, we can also see in the bottom the portal entrances, the 3 portals. Above that, the lancet stained glass windows and the rose windows. Here we're looking at the south wall, and as you can tell, this is really dominated by this large central rose window, as well as the flying buttresses on the left-hand side here and the right-hand side. You can really get a sense of the building, the mass of this building and the construction of this building from this perspective. Although this is not the most heavily ornamented of Gothic portal entrances, it is quite breathtaking. And just a reminder from the video you watched a little earlier in this lecture, this would have been painted, so we would have been seeing rich yellows and blues and reds in this vision here. You can see the door jambs surrounding these portal entrances, these characters beckoning the viewer, the visitor, inside the cathedral. Beneath Christ and his mandorla, we'll zoom in on him shortly, but you can see the Old Testament kings peering up. And above this, which is just out of our vision, we have the 12 apostles in the rose window looking down. And just a reminder that nothing is wasted in aesthetics and art. Just looking back to one of the Roman triumphal arches, this tripartite entranceway. In a Romanesque lecture, we spoke about the anatomy of a portal entrance. Just to refresh on that, we have 3 important components here in our upper portal entrance. That is the archivolts, which are the arches that overarch the tympanum, which is that center triangle, number 2 here. That would generally be the place that the most important part of the story would be displayed. So that's where we'll see imagery like Christ and the Virgin Mary. And then beneath that, the lintel, which will have some sort of supporting narrative. This tripartite entrance shows the story in the life of Christ. Here we see on the right-hand side of the portal entrance, which is the left hand of Christ. So Christ is in the center portal entrance. Mary here is shown on the left. We have Mary, Christ's mother, who conceived him through the Immaculate Conception, shown as the Queen of Heaven. We'll see Christ and Mary throughout Christian history in all these different costumes or guises. So here she is shown enthroned. She's sitting in a throne as a queen. She has a halo. She's flanked by angels. And if you look at the archivolts around her, we have the story of the liberal arts, the 7 liberal arts from the ancient Greek belief, the trivium, which is grammar, rhetoric, and dialect, the quadrivium, which is arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. This is on the left side portal entrance, or the right hand of God. This is a scene of the Ascension. So you see Christ in the center. He has the Greek cross in his halo behind his head. That's how we can be certain that it's Christ. He is flanked by angels that are pulling him up towards heaven on this cloud that he's floating on. Surrounding him in the archivolts are symbols of the zodiac. And here in the center, Old Testament kings and queens in the doorjamb peering up, and from the trumu, there's symbols of the evangelists surrounding Christ, and on his left and right are Saint Matthew in the form of an angel, Mark in the form of a lion, John in the form of an eagle, and Luke in the form of a bull. Christ in the center in the full body halo, we call that the mandorla, and with his other halo surrounding his head as well. So I'd like to take a few minutes and look at some of the door jambs here. If you are taking my online class, this will be an opportunity for you to drop me an email and just let me know how you're doing and to share a bit of a compare and contrast. So this is the West door jamb from 1145. I want you to take a moment and look at your initial impressions, so just your overall observations. What do you see? What is the image of? What is it set in? So look at the columns, look at the figures themselves, look at the clothes, look at the way their feet are. Think about gravity and what gravity effects have on these figures. So just jot down some notes about that. Here's the South door jamb from the 13th century. So think about those same components. Think about the figures. Think about where they are. What is surrounding them? Where are they set in? What effects do gravity have on them? And now looking at them side by side, what I'd really like for you to tease out for me, what I'd really like the take home for you to be, is to think about the evolution of these sculptures. The left-hand side distinctly Romanesque, the right-hand side distinctly Gothic, and that should be your conclusion for what you send me via email. Here, finally, the interior of Chartres Cathedral. You can see the high Gothic vaulting, the buttressing, pushing all of those groin vaults out onto these piers that are in front of us, these piers collecting all of those vaultings into a heavy, dense mechanism that helps support the weight of the cathedral. There's paintings in light in the form of these stained glass windows. And we'll finish our lecture today with an interactive activity that will also be linked below in the notes section for you to have a little bit of interaction with this stained glass, the rose window above, and the lancets below. So look for that link below and enjoy your week.